This is Walter Bosley. I'll be reading a selection from Architects of the Underworld by Bruce RUX. Controls. The estimable Italian author of several well-researched books on ancient civilization and celestial phenomena, Peter Colissimo, relates the following story in Not of This World, which was told by an American traveler named William Thompson to a review publication of the time called Adventure. Thompson, referred to as an honest businessman, had for several months been a guest of the famous lamasery of Turin in Mongolia in 1920. During his stay there, an adventurer of unsavory reputation named John Spencer also became a guest, brought there by the lamas when they found him dying of fever after a long trek from Manchuria. Newspapers of the time had linked Spencer's name to drug and arms dealing, and possibly counterfeiting as well. His flight from Manchuria was probably connected to such activities. Spencer soon recovered sufficiently to explore the grounds on his own, presumably in search of treasure. Discovering a worn stone staircase not far from the monastery, he followed it to a narrow door, entering a polygonal room of 12 or more sides. Strange designs on the walls he eventually determined were the constellation of Taurus, recognized from identical symbols on a Chinese watch chain in his possession. Casually tracing the patterns, he found that the wall silently opened when he hit the Pleiades at the end of the line. Propping the wall open with a stone from outside, Spencer followed a dim green glow, discernible in the distance, of a dark passageway. Of several available tunnels at the end of this central narrow gallery, Spencer took the one on the far right, which happened to have the sign of the Pleiades above it. Finding himself in a chamber where the green glow was much stronger, Spencer examined a line of 25 or 30 rectangular boxes along the wall, which turned out to be biers he believed could yield funeral treasures. There were no regularities to the bodies in the coffins, save two. None had any jewelry or treasure, and all were somehow perfectly preserved. They were not of the same epoch, becoming older the farther down the line he went. The most recent were deceased lamas dressed like those presently in the lamasery. There was an Indian in a red silk cloak, a man dressed in garb of the 1700s, and two women, one dressed as a man and the other of some origin he could not establish. The final coffin in the line contained something not even human, except in form, dressed in a sort of silver mail, and who in place of a head had a ball of pure silver, with round holes where the eyes should be, and an oval thing full of small holes in lieu of a nose, and there was no mouth. Spencer no sooner got over this shock than the big round eyes were wide open and emitting a horrifying green gleam. Spencer screamed and fled, discovering to his further amazement that it was now night outside, when it had been bright morning just a short time before. Quoting, "I must have walked for 2 or 3 hours, all told," he later related. "It is impossible that I could have lost all sense of time to such an extent in there." End quote. Returning to the monastery, Spencer told his entire story to Thompson, who in turn told the monks. The next morning, the monks, not at all upset and actually smiling, said to him, "My poor friend, your fever has played a dirty trick on you. Why didn't you expect to be cured by visiting our holy places?" Spencer inquired about the corpse without a mouth, and was told, "There are neither corpses nor vaults down there. Come with me if you feel strong enough." The head lama accompanied Spencer to the star chamber, touched a wall with his finger, and walked through a different gallery than Spencer had traversed. After fewer than 10 minutes, they reached a small room in which there was a ledge of boxes, perhaps a foot each in length. "This is what you really saw," said the monk, lifting the lids to reveal perfect miniature replicas of the bodies Spencer had seen. They are images of people who have enriched the world with their wisdom, and so we honor them. It was your fever, my poor friend, which made you think you were standing in front of a real sarcophagi. And as you can see, there is no green light, but only the yellow one from our humble lamps." Sure, the Lama was wrong, but not wishing to contradict him under the circumstances, Spencer asked who the silver, round-headed, mouthless figure was. The Lama pointed to the Pleiades on the map and said, "A high lord from the stars." Later, rejoining Thompson, Spencer said, "It might easily be that I still had some fever, but I absolutely reject the idea that I dreamt it all or was the victim of delirium. I lost the heel of one of my shoes down in the labyrinth and scratched my hands at least a dozen times when I was feeling the stones for any possible snags. I touched the clothes on that corpse and noticed the veins and wrinkles. The piece of wall which opened on the left of the entrance, whereas the opening of the Lama stood in front of, was almost right in front, slightly to the right. The monk has tried to convince me by showing me a miniature copy of what I actually saw." The next week, Spencer left, and Thompson never heard of him again. He asserted the truth of Spencer's story, however, in the retelling. And I quote, "I have on some occasions myself seen corpses in Mongolian monasteries, preserved intact for centuries, perhaps for thousands of years, and have heard people talk several times about silver men who had come from the stars." End quote. Carissimo uses this story to illustrate the likelihood that Spencer saw a man in a spacesuit, but one vital part of the incident would seem to invalidate that. The figure's eyelights came on while he was looking at it. Reflection of the light off of stationary glass or plastic eyepieces? Possibly. But Spencer was definite that they suddenly and abruptly were blazing green light, where before they had been dark. The implication is that something switched on, activated by Spencer's near proximity to it. Carissimo's rendition says, specifically, Spencer, recovering from his surprise, was about to touch the object, or the corpse, when he changed his mind suddenly as the big round eyes of the dead men were wide open and emitting a horrifying green gleam. That means that when Spencer said, "I touched the clothes on that corpse and noticed the veins and wrinkles," he must have been referring to one of the many others he rifled along the line for jewelry and treasure. The so-called corpse without a mouth, the High Lord, and the Silver Man who had come from the stars may well have been a robot. On the surface, the mouthless, silver-headed figure matches the description of many UFO occupants. The metallic silver suit, the blazing eyes, apparently lit from within, the smooth, round, ball-bearing head, and its home in the stars, so to speak. And which seems likelier, that a man would meditate in a helmeted spacesuit in a coffin in an isolated mausoleum, lying in wait for unsuspecting tourists to scare by somehow turning on green eyelights from a hidden switch at just the right moment? Or that a machine of some sort was sensor-activated when its path was crossed. American Indians and Australian Aborigines both refer to so-called creatures without mouths, who come down out of the heavens. For example, the Kachinas, deified ancestral spirits, fall into the category of otherworldly beings that could perhaps be robots. Anthropologist Frank Waters writes about the Kachina in The Book of the Hopi, quoting, "It is distinctly Hopi when in a kiva we hear the strange falsetto yell announcing a presence above, and feel the stamp on the roof demanding admittance, and see coming down the ladder a spirit whose manifested form has never been glimpsed among the figures of this mortal world. Even as they come down the ladder one by one, they utter their low, eerie moans and move restlessly about, spirits of planets from the depths of space." End quote. Though believed to have bases in the San Francisco mountains of present-day New Mexico and other locations on Earth, the Kachinas are considered to come from much farther away, a long, long way, from neighboring stars, constellations too distant to be visible from mysterious spirit worlds. The chief earthly Kachina, who led the Hopi to their present locations to live according to their lore, is the most interesting of all for his resemblance to the reported insectoid UFO occupants. His name, Kokopilau, means wood hump, which he has on his back. He is also known as the humpbacked flute player, images of which can be seen all across the American Southwest and carved on rocks from South America to Canada. Kokopilau is an entirely benign creature, one of two mahu, or insect people resembling the katydid or locust, that proved their strength and indestructibility to the eagle, causing the eagle to tell the mahu, "Now that you have stood both tests, you may use my feather any time you want to talk to our father, Sun, the Creator, on behalf of the Hopi, and I will deliver your message because I am the conqueror of air and master of height. I am the only one who has the power of space above, for I represent the loftiness of the spirit and can deliver your prayers to the Creator." In other words, the insect people serve, more or less, the purpose of the Holy Spirit to Christianity, a power left behind to supervise, instruct, and guide the people in the great God's absence. Kokopilau is always depicted playing the flute, since his presence is announced by enchanting music, signifying perhaps hypnotic effect. The hump on his back contains the seeds of plants and flowers, and he is often depicted with an enormous penis, because he carries the seeds of human reproduction also. He is the one referred to as the locust of the insect pair. In drawings, he is almost never depicted without antennae on his head, often with knobs on the end of them. Of course, robotic UFO occupants match a similar description, involving themselves in human reproduction and in collecting plant and soil samples, as well as biological material from other animals. The Kachina itself is an eerie creature with a masked face that doesn't speak as men do. Their language is no longer known to man, though it is believed that it once was. Quoting, "Kokopilau's song is still remembered, but the words are so ancient that nobody knows what they mean," writes Waters. "The Kachinas may be invoked to manifest their benign powers so that man may be enabled to continue his never-ending journey. They are the invisible forces of life, not gods, but rather intermediaries, messengers." In other words, what our Judeo-Christian culture might refer to as an angel. Their origin is unknown, lost in the prehistoric past along with the understanding of their language. Kachina is merely a word meaning respected spirit, and a kiva is the sacred underground chamber in which all religious mystery plays are enacted, like a womb, representing the previous underworld through which the Hopi emerge into the world above, following the rituals. These spirits, men and women of the tribe in costume, invite all their children aged 6 to 8 into the society of the Kachinas or Powamus. Every boy and girl must belong to one or the other society by that age. These initiations, like most in tribal societies, are not entirely pleasant. Being stripped naked and whipped is part of the process, frequently hard enough to let blood. Some of the Kachinas are downright frightening, including a variety that are actually called monster Kachinas. These creatures, in a ritual not unlike our own Halloween, go from door to door in the village on prearranged nights, scraping implements of dismemberment along the walls as they go, their purpose being to frighten. They demand entrance to given hovels, insisting a named child be handed over to them for listed transgressions. In some cases, the child is stripped naked in the street and whipped or doused in cold water and admonished to behave better in the future. Sometimes they are merely frightened for a few minutes, given the distinct impression that they are to be carried away and cut to pieces, before the mother is allowed to placate the avenging spirits with food offerings that they will ultimately accept. There are moderate variations of this ritual, one of which is allowing the child to offer some food or a given penance for their misdeeds, which will be refused before he or she is given a memorable but not severe punishment. In European culture, this was the original role of Father Christmas or St. Nicholas, corrupted to our present Santa Claus. Like our Christmas, the Hopi-Kachina rituals are held in the winter. Father Christmas was a much more ambivalent figure than today's jolly, sanitized version of Santa. He carried with him both presents and birch rods, and rewarded each child according to his deeds of the year. The monster Kachinas do the same. As the Kachinas are servants or intermediaries of the great sky god, so does Father Christmas have his elves, which, as we have noticed, is not an uncommon description of UFO entities. In both cases, a wise and benevolent sky god keeps tabs on his people, specifically to reward or punish them in accordance with their deeds. In essence, the Judeo-Christian tradition is based on the same tenets, and in all cases, as the famous Yuletide song goes, "He knows when you've been sleeping, he knows when you're awake, he knows when you've been bad or good. So be good, for goodness sake." This is Walter Bosley, and I have just read a section from Architects of the Underworld by Bruce RUX.